black man named Jamal West was wrongfully arrested by two racist police officers, Andrew and Silas. But when Jamal's true identity came to light, the entire police station was left speechless. What happened? Who is Jamal West, really? And what made the station realize they were facing more than just a legal case, but a massive reckoning? Let's dive into the story. But before we do, let me know where you're tuning in from by dropping a comment below. And if you enjoy stories like this, be sure to subscribe. It was just another day in the city. The sun was creeping up over the tall buildings, casting long shadows over the busy streets. The usual sounds of the city, car horns, distant sirens, chatter, filled the air. People were getting their morning routines underway, heading to work, grabbing coffee, or walking their dogs. The neighborhood buzzed with energy, full of life. Jamal West strolled through the streets calmly, his relaxed demeanor a stark contrast to the fast-moving crowd around him. In his mid-30s, Jamal was sharply dressed in a tailored suit. The polished leather of his shoes clicked against the pavement as he walked, a subtle but commanding presence. He wasn't seeking attention, but the quiet confidence he carried made people take notice. He had just finished breakfast at his favorite diner, a place he loved to visit when he had time. The staff knew him well and always got his order just right: scrambled eggs, turkey bacon, and a side of fruit. After settling his bill, Jamal made his way to his car, a sleek black sedan parked along the street. Just then, his phone buzzed, a message from his mother reminding him of their dinner plans that night. He smiled, quickly replying that he hadn't forgotten and was looking forward to it. Family meant everything to Jamal. As he was about to unlock his car, he noticed two police officers heading straight toward him. Their eyes were locked on him, their expressions unreadable, but tense. He didn't know them, but that wasn't too strange. New cops often rotated through the neighborhood. What felt different, though, was the intensity of their stare. Growing up, Jamal had learned how to handle interactions with the police, especially as a black man. His father had drilled it into him. Stay calm, be respectful, and don't give them any reason to escalate. Jamal held onto those lessons tight. "Excuse me, sir," one of the officers called out as they got closer. Jamal turned to face them, his phone still in hand. "Yes, officer," Jamal responded, his voice calm and polite. He glanced at the officer's badge. Andrew. The other officer, Silas, stood slightly behind, one hand resting near his holster, just hovering over his belt. "Can I see some ID?" Andrew asked, his tone more like a demand than a request. No greeting, no explanation, just straight to the point. Jamal had dealt with moments like this before, but something about this situation felt off. There was an edge in the air that made his instincts kick in. "May I ask why?" Jamal kept his voice even, not wanting to escalate things. He knew his rights. He hadn't done anything wrong, so why were they asking for his ID? Riley's eyes narrowed, a slight smirk curling at the corner of his mouth, but no answer came. "Just show us your ID, sir. It's a simple request." Jamal held Andrew's gaze for a moment, then with deliberate calmness, reached into his jacket pocket. "All right," he said, pulling out his wallet, "but I'd still like to know why I'm being asked for it." As he handed over his driver's license, he noticed Silas shift slightly, like he was bracing for something. Jamal's senses were on high alert, but he stayed composed. Andrew took the ID, glancing over it, but his expression remained unchanged. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" Andrew asked, his tone laced with accusation. Jamal's brows furrowed, puzzled by the question. "I'm just heading to my car," he replied honestly. "Is there a problem?" Andrew ignored the question. "Where are you coming from?" "I had breakfast at the diner down the street," Jamal answered, still calm. "Like I said, is there a problem?" Officer Andrew glanced up at Jamal, a flicker of something, maybe irritation, crossed his face before handing the ID back. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area," he said, a smirk tugging at his lips. "You match the description of someone we're looking for." Jamal felt his stomach tighten. He knew where this was headed. It was all too familiar. A black man, well-dressed, in a nice neighborhood. He must be up to something. Jamal had heard it all before, but that didn't make it any easier to swallow. "I see," Jamal said carefully. "Well, I'm sure this is a misunderstanding. I'm just here to get to my car and head to work." Andrew didn't acknowledge his words, stepping closer instead, his body language growing more aggressive. "What kind of work do you do?" "I'm a lawyer," Jamal said evenly. "I have a meeting in an hour, so if there's nothing else, I'd like to be on my way." That answer seemed to catch Andrew off guard, his smirk wavering for a split second before returning. "A lawyer, huh? You don't say." Silas, who had been quiet the entire time, finally spoke up. "You sure you're not hiding anything? Got anything illegal in that car of yours?" Jamal could feel the tension mounting. He knew how quickly these encounters could spiral out of control. He had to keep his cool, diffuse the situation. "There's nothing illegal in my car, officer. You're welcome to check, but I'd prefer if you didn't waste your time. I'm just trying to get to work." Andrew's expression hardened. "You don't get to tell us how to do our job. Step away from the car." Jamal hesitated. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong, but the situation was escalating fast. He had to decide: comply and hope it didn't get worse, or stand his ground and risk things getting ugly. His father's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him to stay calm, to be smart. "All right," Jamal said slowly, raising his hand slightly to show he wasn't a threat. "I'll step back." He took a step away from the car, but as he did, Andrew moved in closer, his hand now gripping the handle of his baton. Jamal's heart raced, but he kept his face neutral, refusing to show fear. Without warning, Andrew grabbed Jamal's arm and twisted it behind his back. The sudden move shocked Jamal, and he winced in pain. Before he could even process what was happening, Silas was on him too, forcing him to the ground. "Hey, what are you doing?" Jamal protested, trying to keep his voice steady despite the sharp pain in his shoulder. He wasn't resisting, but the officers were treating him like he was. "You're under arrest for resisting arrest," Andrew said coldly as he tightened the cuffs around Jamal's wrists. Jamal's mind raced. Resisting arrest? For what? He didn't resist. He did exactly what they asked. Jamal tried to reason with himself, tried to stay calm, but deep down, he knew it didn't matter. They had made up their minds the moment they laid eyes on him. By now, the scene had drawn the attention of onlookers. Across the street, an elderly woman, Mrs. Agnes Carter, watched in disbelief from her balcony. She recognized Jamal. She'd seen him around the neighborhood plenty of times and knew he wasn't the kind of person to cause trouble. "What are you doing to him?" she called out, her voice shaky but filled with anger. "He didn't do anything wrong." A young couple out for a walk with their dog had also stopped to watch. The man pulled out his phone and began recording. "This is messed up," he muttered to his girlfriend. "They're arresting him for nothing." Jamal noticed the phone, and for a brief moment he felt a sliver of hope. Maybe the footage would come in handy later. Maybe it would show the truth, but for now he was helpless. The officers yanked him to his feet, and he forced himself to remain calm, focusing on his next move. He knew that anything he said could be twisted against him. As they led him toward the squad car, more people began gathering, watching, filming, and shouting their disapproval. "This isn't right," one man yelled from across the street. "He didn't do anything." But Andrew and Silas didn't flinch. Their expressions were set, their minds already made up. They shoved Jamal into the back seat of the police car, slamming the door behind him. Before the car pulled away, Jamal turned his head to look at the growing crowd. He could see the concern, the frustration, and the anger in their eyes. Taking a deep breath, he knew he had to say something, even if it was only a few words. "This isn't over," he called out loudly, his voice cutting through the noise of the street. "This isn't over." The words lingered in the air as the car drove off, leaving the stunned crowd behind. Inside the squad car, Jamal's mind was racing. What would happen next? How could he fight this? He wasn't going to let this slide. He would make sure justice was served. When they arrived at the station, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the outside world. The place was cold, with its gray walls and harsh fluorescent lights. Officers moved quickly, some chatting in low voices, others focused on their duties. There was a tension in the air that made people glance over their shoulders and speak in whispers. Jamal, still cuffed, was escorted through the station's front doors. Andrew and Silas flanked him, their faces unreadable. As they walked through the booking area, a few officers glanced up, taking in Jamal's appearance. He was not the usual type they brought in, a well-dressed black man with an air of calm confidence. "Over here," Andrew barked, steering Jamal toward a desk where a tired-looking officer sat behind a computer. The officer barely looked up. "Name?" he asked, fingers poised to type. "Jamal West," Andrew replied before Jamal could answer. The officer typed the name into the system, frowning slightly as he scanned the screen. He didn't say anything, just motioned for Andrew to move Jamal to the fingerprinting station. "Let's get this over with," Andrew muttered as he shoved Jamal forward. Jamal didn't resist. He knew better than to give them any reason to escalate the situation. As they took his fingerprints, Jamal remained quiet. His mind was racing. How had it come to this? He'd done nothing wrong, yet here he was, treated like a criminal. But he kept his composure. This wasn't the first time he'd dealt with something like this, and sadly, it probably wouldn't be the last. After fingerprinting, Andrew and Silas led him to a small holding cell at the back of the station. The cell was cramped, with a narrow bench along one wall and a metal toilet in the corner. The air reeked of disinfectant and something sour. They uncuffed him and shoved him inside. "Make yourself comfortable," Silas sneered, his voice thick with sarcasm. "You might be here a while." Jamal sat down on the bench, taking a deep breath. He didn't react to their taunts. There was no point. They wanted him to lose his cool, to give them an excuse. He wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. As Andrew and Silas walked away, they exchanged a glance, a silent understanding between them. They had done their job, brought in another troublemaker. Now they could move on to whatever was next. But something didn't sit right with Andrew. Something about Jamal nagged at him. The way he carried himself, that calm confidence. It didn't fit the usual profile of someone they picked up. "Think he's really a lawyer?" Silas scoffed as they headed back to the front desk. "Probably just another punk in a nice suit." "Yeah," Andrew muttered, though his thoughts were elsewhere. He wasn't so sure anymore. Something about Jamal didn't add up. Andrew couldn't shake a feeling, but he brushed it off. He had orders and followed them. That was all that mattered. Still, something about this arrest was gnawing at him. As they reached the desk, a younger officer stepped forward. Officer Stevens, fresh on the force for just a few months. Eager to prove himself, he was sharp. Sharper than most expected. "Andrew," Stevens called quietly. "Can I have a word?" Andrew frowned. "What is it?" Stevens hesitated, glancing around, ensuring no one was listening. "That guy you just brought in, Jamal West, I think I recognize him." Andrew's frown deepened. "What are you talking about?" Stevens lowered his voice. "I saw his name in an article a while back. He's not just some lawyer, he's a civil rights attorney. High-profile cases, big name." Andrew's eyes widened, but he quickly hid his reaction. "You sure?" "Positive. Took me a minute, but when I heard his name, it clicked. You might want to be careful with this one. If it's who I think it is, this could be a real problem." Andrew didn't respond right away. His stomach knotted, but he tamped it down. "This can't be right," he thought. "We arrested him fair and square, just another suspect." But the doubt was there, whispering at him. "I'll take care of it," Andrew muttered, waving Stevens off. As Andrew walked away, that uneasy feeling settled deeper in his chest. Stevens, meanwhile, wasn't convinced. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts, debating his next move. With a sigh, he dialed a number, hoping he was making the right call. The line rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Yeah?" "Captain, it's Stevens," he whispered. "We've got a situation down here at the station. You should know about it." Back in the holding cell, Jamal sat calmly, his mind sharp and focused. He knew this wasn't just about him. This was something bigger. He'd been singled out, but the reasons were still a mystery. Regardless, he kept his cool. This wasn't his first rodeo. He'd been through worse, and he knew how to handle himself. After what felt like an hour, the door to the holding area opened. A woman entered, sharp-eyed, mid-30s, with a commanding presence that immediately caught everyone's attention. Lieutenant Kate Thompson had recently transferred to the precinct, and though she was still getting familiar with the team, she had already established herself as a no-nonsense leader who followed the rules to a T. Thompson scanned the room, her gaze landing on Andrew and Silas, who were talking quietly at the front desk. Something about their body language caught her attention, her instincts telling her something was off. "Andrew, Silas," she called, walking over. "What's going on?" Andrew straightened up, surprised to see her. "Nothing much, ma'am. Just another routine arrest." Thompson's eyes narrowed. "Really? I heard you brought in a man named Jamal West this morning. What was the charge?" Andrew stiffened slightly before replying, "Resisting arrest, ma'am. We had reason to believe he was involved in suspicious activity. When we questioned him, he refused to cooperate." Thompson raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" "Yes, ma'am," Andrew said firmly. Thompson didn't immediately respond. She studied Andrew's face, searching for any cracks in his story. She had dealt with officers like him before, ones who thought they could bend the rules as long as it fit their narrative. But she was different. She played by the book and expected her team to do the same. "Take me to him," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Andrew hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Right this way, ma'am." As they walked towards the holding cells, Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than Andrew was letting on. Something just didn't sit right. When they reached Jamal's cell, she paused, her eyes locking onto the man inside. He was sitting on the bench, his hands folded in his lap, looking completely at ease despite the situation. There was something about his demeanor that made her pause. This wasn't the behavior of someone who had just resisted arrest. "This is him?" she asked Andrew, her tone skeptical. "Yes, ma'am," Andrew confirmed. "Like I said, he resisted, so we had no choice but to bring him in." Thompson said nothing. Instead, she opened the cell door and stepped inside. Jamal looked up, meeting her gaze with steady, calm eyes. He wasn't intimidated, but he wasn't defiant either. There was something else, something Andrew had missed. "You're Jamal West?" Thompson asked, her voice measured. Jamal nodded. "That's right." She paused, studying him for a moment. "I've heard of you. Civil rights attorney, right?" Jamal's expression didn't change, but there was a slight flicker of acknowledgement in his eyes. "That's correct." Thompson turned back to Andrew, her face unreadable. "We need to talk," she said, her tone sharp. Andrew swallowed hard. He could feel the situation slipping out of control. Lieutenant Thompson remained composed as she listened to Jamal's account, noting the clarity and control in his voice. "Mr. West," she said carefully, "I'm Lieutenant Kate Thompson. I'm here to ask you a few questions about what happened." "Of course, Lieutenant," Jamal responded, his tone calm but firm. "I'm happy to cooperate." Thompson gave a slight nod, appreciating how level-headed he seemed. "I've been informed that you resisted arrest, which led to you being brought in. I'd like to hear your version of events." Jamal kept his eyes on her, unwavering. "Lieutenant, I complied with every instruction officers Andrew and Silas gave me. I was simply walking to my car when they stopped me. I asked why I was being detained, and that question alone appeared to escalate things. The next thing I knew, I was in handcuffs, accused of resisting, despite following their orders." Thompson's gaze narrowed slightly as she processed his explanation. His tone was even, respectful, but beneath the surface was a quiet confidence. This wasn't just someone trying to talk their way out of trouble. He spoke with the precision of someone accustomed to being in high-pressure situations. She turned to Andrew Riley, who stood nearby, arms crossed but clearly uncomfortable. "Officer Riley," Thompson said, her tone now more pointed, "is there something you're not telling me?" Andrew stood a few feet behind Thompson, her expression carefully composed. that true, Riley? Thompson's voice cut through the air, sharp and demanding. Did Mr. West follow your instructions? Andrew shifted uncomfortably, rubbing the back of his neck. Well, ma'am, he stammered. He questioned us and things got a bit tense. We thought he might be hiding something. Thompson's eyes narrowed. And what exactly led you to that conclusion? Andrew hesitated, searching for a credible answer. It was just a gut feeling, ma'am. A gut feeling? Thompson echoed incredulously. Is that really the basis for your arrest? Before Andrew could respond, the sound of the holding area door swung open, drawing everyone's attention. Officer Stevens rushed in, looking slightly winded, and paused as he recognized the charged atmosphere. Lieutenant, I need to talk to you, he said, glancing nervously between Jamal and Riley. Thompson shot Andrew one last piercing look before stepping out of the cell, shutting the door behind her. What is it, Stevens? Lowering his voice, Stevens leaned in. Ma'am, I've been doing some digging. Jamal West isn't just any lawyer. He's a prominent civil rights attorney, heavily involved in major cases that often make headlines. If it gets out that we arrested him without cause, it's going to be a disaster. Thompson felt her stomach lurch. She had suspected there was more to this, but the weight of Stevens' words hit hard. Are you sure? Positive, he replied, showing her his phone, which displayed Jamal's professional profile. If we don't handle this carefully, we're going to have far more than just an internal investigation on our hands. Thompson quickly scanned the page, her eyes widening as she absorbed the information. Jamal wasn't merely a lawyer, he was a heavyweight in the legal field, someone who had taken on police departments, corporations, and government entities. She understood that if they weren't cautious, this could turn into a full-blown crisis for the station. Turning to Andrew, who was still lingering near the cell with Silas, Thompson sensed the unease radiating from both officers. She knew she had to act swiftly. The situation was spiraling and they couldn't afford any missteps. Andrew, Silas, Thompson called out, urgency in her tone as she headed back toward them. We need to talk. Now. The two officers exchanged a concerned glance before following her into a quieter area of the station. Once they were out of earshot, Thompson faced them, her expression grave. Do you have any idea who you just arrested? She demanded, keeping her voice low but laced with intensity. Jamal West isn't just some random guy. He's a civil rights attorney with a reputation for taking on police misconduct. If he files a lawsuit against us, we're in deep trouble. Andrew's face paled, his bravado quickly fading. Ma'am, we didn't know, he admitted, glancing at Silas for support. It doesn't matter, Thompson snapped, frustration bubbling over. You should have done your homework before bringing him in. Now we have to figure out how to handle this, and fast. As she spoke, raised voices from outside the station began to seep in, growing louder by the second. Thompson's heart sank as she realized what was unfolding. The crowd outside was swelling, their chants unmistakable, protesters demanding justice and Jamal's release. Great, Thompson muttered under her breath. Just what we needed. Stevens, who had been lingering nearby, stepped forward. Lieutenant, the community is already fired up about this, he said, concern etched on his face. If we don't act quickly, it's going to get ugly. We've got activists, local leaders, and even the media starting to gather, Stevens said, his voice tense. If we don't act soon, this could blow up into a full-scale crisis. Thompson took a deep breath, knowing he was right. She'd seen similar situations spiral out of control, minor incidents that grew into major conflicts when mishandled. But this wasn't just about managing a situation. It was about protecting the integrity of the police force and avoiding a public relations and legal nightmare. We need to get ahead of this, Thompson said firmly. Andrew, Silas, I want a complete report on the arrest. Every step you took and why. I don't care how late you stay, just get it done. Stevens, help me craft a response for the press. We need to control the story before it gets out of hand. As the officers hurried to carry out her orders, Thompson felt the weight of responsibility bearing down on her. She had only been at the station for a few weeks, and already she was facing a potential disaster. But she wasn't about to let this mess ruin her career or the department's reputation. In the holding cell, Jamal sat quietly, his mind racing as the noise outside grew louder. He could hear the crowd swelling, his community, his family, and the leaders who had always supported him. A small flicker of hope sparked inside him, but he knew it wasn't time to relax. The police still held the upper hand, and he had seen how they could twist situations to their advantage. He wasn't going to underestimate them. Up front, Thompson peered through the station's front window, watching as the crowd grew to over 100 people. Signs waved in the air, and chants of justice for Jamal echoed through the streets. Reporters had arrived, their cameras rolling, capturing the scene that was quickly turning the police station into a symbol of unrest in the community. Frustration churned in Thompson's gut as she watched the crowd, her jaw tight. She knew the situation was teetering on the edge of chaos. One wrong move, and everything could erupt. But doing nothing wasn't an option either. This was going to spiral out of control whether she acted or not. "We need to release him," Thompson said suddenly, her voice grim. "It's the only way to defuse this." Stevens nodded, though his concern was evident. "But how are we going to explain it to the media? They're not just going to accept that we let him go without a reason." Thompson thought for a moment before responding. "We'll frame it as a misunderstanding. After reviewing the evidence, we found no cause for the arrest and decided to release him. We'll stress that we take these matters seriously and are committed to justice and fairness." It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was the best option she had. If they were lucky, it would be enough to calm the crowd and prevent the situation from getting worse. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she had to think about the bigger picture: the department, her career, and the potential fallout if this wasn't handled right. Determined, Thompson turned from the window and made her way to the holding area. As she walked, she passed Andrew and Silas, who were typing furiously, clearly rattled by the day's events. She paused briefly, her eyes cold as she addressed them. "When this is over, we're going to have a serious talk about what went wrong here," she said, her tone cutting. "And trust me, it won't be pleasant." Andrew swallowed hard, giving a stiff nod. He knew he was in deep trouble, but there was nothing to do now but hope Thompson could fix the disaster they had created. When Thompson reached Jamal's cell, she unlocked the door herself, stepping inside with a calm demeanor. "Mr. West, after reviewing the situation, it's clear there was a misunderstanding. You're free to go." Jamal stood slowly, his expression unreadable. "A misunderstanding? Is that what we're calling it now?" Thompson met his gaze, not flinching. "Yes, and I'm deeply sorry for what happened today. It shouldn't have gone this far." Jamal studied her, his sharp eyes searching for signs of dishonesty. Finally, he gave a slow nod. "I appreciate the apology, Lieutenant, but don't think for a second that this is over." Thompson didn't doubt it. She knew Jamal West was not a man who would let this incident fade quietly. But right now, her priority was getting him out of the station and diffusing the growing tension outside. She led Jamal through the station, past officers who avoided his gaze. As they reached the front door, Thompson paused and took a deep breath. "I'll do everything I can to make this right," she said quietly. Jamal didn't respond, but he nodded and stepped outside. The moment he appeared, the crowd erupted into cheers, cameras flashing, and reporters calling out questions. Jamal ignored them, walking directly to his family and friends who were waiting to embrace him. Thompson lingered at the door, watching the scene unfold. Her face was expressionless, but inside, she knew this was just the beginning. Jamal West wouldn't let this go quietly, and the ripple effects of today's events were sure to be felt far beyond this moment. The immediate crisis had been avoided, at least for the time being. The crowd outside had started to break up, and the reporters were packing their gear, preparing to leave. The overwhelming tension that had gripped the station all day was finally starting to lift. Lieutenant Kate Thompson, though, knew this was far from over. There was still a long road ahead to repair the damage caused by the day's events, but she was ready to take it head on. As Jamal West walked away from the station, he understood that this was only the beginning of a much larger battle. He had been wronged, but he also knew how to turn that wrong into a fight for something greater. The truth would eventually come to light, and when it did, it would shake the foundations of both the police department and the town itself. Inside the station, the tension hadn't fully evaporated. Since Jamal had walked out the front doors, Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Sitting in her office, reviewing reports from officers Andrew and Silas, she kept finding herself distracted by thoughts of Jamal. There was something about the way he had conducted himself. So calm, so measured, almost as if he had expected the whole situation, that nagged at her. She trusted her instincts, and right now, they were telling her that there was more to this story. The atmosphere outside her office reflected the gravity of the day. Officers moved around the station, avoiding eye contact, still cautious after the high tensions earlier. The crowd might have dispersed, but everyone knew that the fallout from this wouldn't be easily forgotten. Thompson leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. The silence in her office was stark compared to the turmoil in her thoughts. She needed to get to the bottom of who Jamal West really was, and why his arrest had set off such a massive reaction. For the sake of her own career and the integrity of the department, she couldn't afford to leave these questions unanswered. Opening her laptop, she began digging into Jamal's background. The information she found was eye-opening. Articles, interviews, and news reports painted a picture of a man who was far more than just an attorney. Jamal West was a well-known civil rights lawyer who had taken on some of the most powerful institutions in the country, winning cases that changed lives and garnered national attention. As Thompson read about Jamal's most recent victory, a lawsuit that exposed corruption within another police department, leading to multiple firings and criminal charges, she felt a chill run down her spine. Jamal had won big, but it had also put him squarely on the radar of law enforcement agencies everywhere. The more she dug, the more troubling details she uncovered. One particular piece of information made her heart race. Jamal had been involved in a federal investigation into systemic racism within law enforcement, an investigation that had already led to federal oversight of several departments. There were whispers that more police forces were under scrutiny, and Thompson's gut told her that her own department was now in the crosshairs. She immediately made a call to a trusted contact in the FBI, someone who could give her the information she needed without escalating the situation unnecessarily. The conversation was brief, but by the time she hung up, her worst suspicions had been confirmed. Jamal West was working undercover, gathering evidence for a federal case that could implicate high-ranking officials in the local law enforcement community, including her own department. Sitting back in her chair, Thompson's mind raced. This was much bigger than she had initially thought. Jamal wasn't just a wronged citizen. He had been deliberately targeted, and the officers who arrested him had unwittingly fallen into a much larger trap. If this came to light, the scandal would be monumental. Thompson knew she had to confront Andrew and Silas, but she needed more information first. She spent the next hour piecing together everything she could about Jamal's work, his connections, and the ongoing federal investigation. The deeper she went, the more convinced she became that this situation was far more dangerous than anyone realized. Finally, she stood, steeling herself for what was to come. She couldn't allow her department to be dragged down because of someone else's mistake. She made her way to the bullpen, preparing for the confrontation that was about to unfold. When she reached Andrew and Silas, they were busy going over their reports, but immediately sensed her seriousness when she approached. "Lieutenant," Andrew greeted her cautiously, his tone tentative. "Do you need something?" Thompson folded her arms and fixed them with a stern look. "We need to talk." Now. The two officers exchanged a worried glance before following her into an empty conference room. Thompson closed the door behind them, the stark room amplifying the tension. It was a place designed for tough conversations, and both officers could feel the weight of the moment. "What's going on?" Silas asked, trying to sound casual, but the nervous tremor in his voice gave him away. Thompson didn't waste time. "I know exactly who Jamal West is." Both men went pale. Neither of them spoke, but the fear in their eyes told Thompson all she needed to know. They had known all along. The past was catching up to them fast. Do you even realize the kind of chaos you've caused? Thompson's voice was low but sharp, her frustration simmering beneath the surface. Jamal West isn't just anyone. He's a civil rights attorney and a federal asset, working undercover to gather evidence on police corruption. Evidence that could bring down this department. Andrew's face turned pale. We had no idea, Lieutenant. He didn't mention anything about being undercover. We thought he was just another what? Thompson cut him off sharply. Another black man you thought you could rough up with no consequences? Silas flinched, staring at the ground. Andrew opened his mouth, but no words came out. Thompson could see it sinking in. The gravity of their actions was finally dawning on them. You've put all of us at risk, she continued, her voice colder. Not just the department, but the entire city. If this investigation blows wide open, we're all going down with it. Andrew finally found his voice. Lieutenant, we didn't know. We were just following protocol. Protocol? Thompson's tone sharpened, her frustration peaking. What protocol? You arrested a man without cause, treated him like a criminal, and now we're tangled in a federal investigation that could tear apart everything we've built. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about the entire department. Silas looked like he might be sick. What do we do now, Lieutenant? Before Thompson could respond, the door burst open, and Chief Frank Daniels stormed in, his face flushed with anger. Lieutenant Thompson, he barked, his voice booming. What in the hell is going on here? Thompson stood up straighter, meeting his furious gaze. Chief, we have a serious problem. Jamal West is... I know who Jamal West is. Daniels cut her off, his voice dripping with frustration. And I know exactly what kind of mess you've gotten us into. Thompson blinked in surprise. Chief, Save it, Daniels snapped, silencing her again. Do you have any idea what kind of position you've put this department in? We've got a civil rights lawyer working undercover in our city, and you've just handed him all the evidence he needs to take us down. This is a disaster, and it's on you. Thompson's jaw tightened. With all due respect, Chief, it's not just on me. Officers Andrew and Silas made the arrest without probable cause, and now we're all paying for it. Daniels' gaze shifted to Andrew and Silas, his expression hardening. We'll deal with them later. Right now, our focus needs to be on damage control. Thompson nodded, trying to stay calm. I've already started digging into it. There's a federal investigation into systemic racism in law enforcement, and West has been gathering evidence for it. If we don't handle this right, it could destroy us. Daniels clenched his fists, barely containing his anger. What's our next move? Before Thompson could respond, there was a knock on the door. A young officer poked his head in, looking nervous. Chief, Lieutenant, there's someone here to see you. Says it's urgent. Daniels frowned. Who is it? The officer swallowed. A federal agent. His name is Williams. The room fell into an uneasy silence as the words hung in the air. Thompson exchanged a tense look with the chief. This was the moment they had been dreading. Send him in, Daniels ordered, his voice tight. The officer disappeared down the hallway, and moments later, the door opened again to reveal Agent Mark Williams. He was tall and imposing, with a serious expression and an air of authority that commanded attention. His tailored suit and gleaming badge reflected the gravity of his presence. Chief Daniels, Lieutenant Thompson? Agent Williams greeted them curtly, his eyes scanning the room. We need to talk. Daniels squared his shoulders, attempting to maintain control. Agent Williams, we can explain. Williams held up a hand, silencing him. There's no need for explanations, Chief. I'm fully aware of the situation, and let me be clear. This is a serious matter. Thompson felt her pulse quicken. The tension in Williams's voice left no doubt that whatever was coming next would be significant. Jamal West is a key asset in a federal investigation. Williams continued, his tone steady. An investigation that has been months in the making. His arrest was a mistake, one that could have major repercussions if not dealt with properly. Daniels shifted uncomfortably. We understand, Agent Williams. We're ready to cooperate fully. Good, Williams replied, His voice clipped. "Because your cooperation is the only thing that will keep this situation from escalating further." Thompson's mind raced as she tried to comprehend the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't just about West anymore. The entire department, and possibly the entire city, was on the line. Williams's gaze hardened as he addressed the room. "You will issue a formal apology to Jamal West on behalf of the department. Any resistance will result in immediate action." Daniel's face flushed with anger, but he gave a stiff nod. "Understood." Williams turned to Thompson, his expression unreadable. "Lieutenant, I expect you to oversee this personally. Make sure there are no further incidents." Thompson swallowed, her mouth dry. "I'll handle it." With a final nod, Williams turned and left the room, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. He paused, casting a glance over his shoulder. "One more thing," he added, his voice dropping to a quiet yet menacing tone. "Consider this your warning. The federal government is watching closely. Any further misconduct will not be tolerated." As the door clicked shut behind him, the room fell into a stunned silence. Thompson felt the immense pressure of the situation, suffocating in its intensity. She knew the road ahead would be perilous, but there was no choice. The tension in the station grew heavier as the day went on. The morning's events had sparked a chain reaction no one could have predicted, and now everyone was anxiously waiting for the next turn of events. The news of Jamal West's wrongful arrest spread quickly, igniting fury across the city. Protests erupted outside the station as activists, community leaders, and citizens demanded justice. Inside, Chief Frank Daniels was desperately trying to salvage his reputation. He knew the department was teetering on the edge of a public relations disaster, and the only hope of preventing it from spiraling out of control was to issue a public apology. But even Daniels understood that an apology might not be enough to calm the years of growing discontent. Seated at his desk, Daniels stared at the phone, his hands trembling slightly as he dialed the public relations team. He needed to draft a statement that would convey the department's seriousness in addressing the incident, though deep down he realized that no words could undo the damage that had been done.
When the PR team picked up, Daniels spoke in a low, controlled tone. "I need a public apology prepared. We're addressing the media outside the station this afternoon." "Understood? Yes, Chief. We'll have it ready," came the reply. Daniels hung up the phone, leaning back in his chair as he ran a hand through his graying hair. The weight of his decisions hung heavy on him, the consequences of turning a blind eye when officers like Andrew and Silas crossed the line. For years, he had convinced himself it was just part of the job, that compromises were necessary to maintain order. But now those compromises were coming back to haunt him. A knock on the door broke Daniel's reverie. Lieutenant Kate Thompson stood there, her face set in a tense, determined expression. "Chief, Jamal West is outside with the crowd," she said. Daniels nodded and stood. "Good. I'm going to make the apology." Thompson hesitated before stepping forward. "Chief, there's something you need to know before you go out there." Daniels raised an eyebrow. "What is it, Thompson?" She took a deep breath. "I've uncovered evidence of systemic corruption within the department. Bribery, cover-ups, racial profiling. This goes way beyond just Andrew and Silas. It's been happening for years, and it's been swept under the rug." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. "Are you certain?" Thompson nodded. "Yes, I've already started gathering the evidence with Jamal's help and the federal oversight team. Cleaning this up is going to be a long and difficult process." Daniels exhaled slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. His shoulders sagged under the enormity of the situation. "Then we do what we have to do. It's time to face the consequences." Thompson gave a small nod. "I'll back you up out there, Chief. We need to show the community we're serious about change." Daniels didn't respond, but the look in his eyes said it all. This was no longer about saving face, it was about survival. If they didn't act now, the entire department could crumble. Together, they walked toward the front of the station. As they approached the doors, the sound of the crowd outside, angry voices demanding justice, grew louder. Daniel's stomach twisted with anxiety, but he kept his face neutral as he pushed open the doors and stepped into the sunlight. The crowd fell silent upon seeing him, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward as reporters shouted questions. Ignoring them, Daniels focused on the podium that had been set up for the press conference. He spotted Jamal in the crowd, his expression unreadable but commanding attention. Daniels cleared his throat and stepped up to the microphone, adjusting it slightly as he faced the crowd. He could feel the weight of their gaze, their judgment hanging heavy in the air. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice steady but strained. "I want to start by acknowledging the events that took place earlier today. This isn't just about what happened to me," Jamal continued, his voice gaining strength. "It's about all of us. It's about every person who has been wronged by a system that was supposed to protect them. It's about ensuring that no one else has to endure what I did. And it's about making sure that justice isn't just a word, but a reality." The crowd roared in approval, and Jamal paused, letting the energy of the moment wash over him. He saw hope in their eyes, a powerful feeling that stirred something deep within him. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he added, his tone measured, "but it can happen if we work for it. It will take time and all of us working together, but I believe we can make it happen. We can build a better future, not just for ourselves, but for the generations to come." As the applause swelled, Jamal stepped away from the podium, his message delivered. The surge of support filled him with determination. He knew this was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey, but he was ready for it, ready to lead the fight for justice, to hold the powerful accountable, and to ensure the voices of the marginalized were heard. As Jamal moved through the crowd, embracing friends and supporters, Lieutenant Thompson stood on the steps of the station, watching. A mix of relief and resolve washed over her, relief that the immediate crisis had been averted, and resolve to see the necessary changes through. She knew the department had a long road ahead, but with people like Jamal West leading the charge, she believed they could succeed. Thompson turned to Chief Daniels, who remained by the podium, his expression a mix of exhaustion and determination. "We have a lot of work to do," she said quietly. Daniels nodded, his eyes still fixed on the crowd. "Yes, we do, but we'll get through this." As the crowd began to disperse, Thompson noticed a figure lingering at the edge. The man was tall, dressed in a dark suit with an air of quiet authority. He watched Jamal with an intense gaze, his expression unreadable. Curious, Thompson made her way over to him. "Can I help you?" she asked. The man turned toward her, his eyes sharp and focused. "I'm here to speak with Mr. West," he said in a low, controlled voice. "I have a message for him." Thompson frowned, studying him more closely. There was something unsettling about him, though she couldn't quite place it. "Who are you?" The man smiled slightly, though the warmth didn't reach his eyes. "Just someone with a vested interest in seeing justice done." Before Thompson could respond, the man turned and walked toward Jamal, vanishing into the crowd. She watched him go, a sense of unease settling in her gut. Whoever he was, she had a feeling this wouldn't be the last time they saw him. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the station steps, Thompson realized that today's events were just the beginning. The fight for justice was far from over, and the road ahead was uncertain. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope, hope that maybe they could finally start making things right. Across the city, in a small community center, Jamal sat at a table surrounded by community leaders, activists, legal experts, and concerned citizens. They were deep in discussion, hammering out the details of the Community Justice Initiative, debating strategies and priorities. "We need to focus on education," argued Maria Hernandez, a local school teacher. "If we want lasting change, we have to start with the youth." "I agree," said Dr. James Carter, a sociology professor. "But we can't ignore the immediate needs of those suffering under an unjust system right now." As the conversation continued, it became clear that change was on the horizon. Slow, difficult, but inevitable. "We need a comprehensive strategy." Jamal took in every viewpoint, making notes and posing questions along the way. The dedication and knowledge on display impressed him, and it was exactly what he'd envisioned, a unified effort tapping into the strengths of the entire community. As the meeting continued, solid plans began to take shape. They decided to establish a legal aid clinic to offer free legal services for those who couldn't afford representation. A Community Oversight Board would also be created to work hand in hand with the police department's Internal Affairs Division. In addition, educational programs for schools and community centers would focus on civil rights, civic involvement, and conflict resolution. By the time the meeting ended, everyone felt energized and clear about the next steps. They knew it was a long road ahead, but the first steps had been taken together. As months passed, the city saw small but meaningful changes begin to take root. With Lieutenant Thompson overseeing the police department and the new oversight board in place, fresh training programs focusing on de-escalation and cultural sensitivity were introduced. Officers like Stevens, who genuinely wanted to improve, were given chances to collaborate with community leaders and social workers. Meanwhile, the Community Justice Initiative hit the ground running, with their legal aid clinic taking on numerous cases and offering representation to people who had experienced wrongful arrests or police misconduct. Educational programs were piloted in several schools, with plans to expand further. But perhaps the most noticeable shift was in the atmosphere of the city. There was a renewed sense of involvement, a feeling that people were coming together to confront deep-rooted issues. Neighborhood watch groups teamed up with police to enhance safety while avoiding racial profiling. Community forums became regular events, fostering open discussions between citizens and local officials. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Incidents of misconduct still occurred, and moments of tension and distrust remained. Change came slowly, and some resisted at every step. But now, systems were in place to handle these challenges, hold people accountable, and keep moving forward. 6 months after the event that ignited it all, Jamal found himself back at the police station. This time, he wasn't a suspect or a victim. He was a partner. He had been invited to speak at a training session for new recruits, to share his experiences and help shape the next generation of officers. Walking through the familiar halls, Jamal reflected on how much had changed. The station was still bustling with activity, but there was a new sense of openness that hadn't existed before. Officers greeted him with nods of respect, and some even stopped to shake his hand. Lieutenant Thompson met him at the door to the training room. "Thank you for coming, Mr. West," she said, extending her hand. "I believe your perspective will be invaluable for these recruits." Jamal shook her hand, noting the sincerity in her expression. "I'm happy to be here," he replied. "And please, call me Jamal." As they stepped into the room, Jamal saw rows of young faces turned toward him, some curious, others hesitant. He understood their wariness. He represented a challenge to the way things had always been done. But he also saw the potential for real change. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady. "My name is Jamal West, and I'm here to talk to you about justice. Not just the justice you'll be sworn to protect, but the kind of justice that extends beyond badges and courtrooms. It's about treating every person you meet with dignity and respect." As he spoke, sharing his thoughts and experiences, Jamal saw the recruits were engaged. They asked thoughtful questions, participated in meaningful discussions, and genuinely wanted to learn how to become better officers. After the session ended and Jamal was collecting his things, one of the recruits approached him. She was young, just out of her teens, with a determined look on her face. "Mr. West," she said hesitantly, "I just wanted to thank you for coming today. I joined the force because I wanted to make a difference, to help people. But after everything that's happened, I started to doubt if I'd made the right choice. Hearing you today reminded me why I'm here." Jamal smiled, moved by her honesty. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sarah," she replied. "Sarah Johnson." "Well, Sarah," Jamal said, "I'm glad you're here. The department needs people like you, people who want to make a difference, who are willing to learn and challenge things. Don't lose that spirit." As Sarah walked away, Jamal felt a surge of hope. It was people like her, he realized, who would ultimately decide whether the changes they were fighting for would endure. Later that night, Jamal sat in his office at the Community Justice Initiative, reviewing case files and reports. The work was relentless, but every small victory made the long hours and sleepless nights worthwhile. Just then, a knock on the door broke his concentration. He looked up to see Maria Hernandez, the teacher who had been a key player in shaping their educational programs. "Jamal," she said. Maria's excitement was clear as she spoke. "I just came from a meeting with the school board. They've officially approved our curriculum for all high schools in the district." Jamal jumped to his feet, a wide grin lighting up his face. "That's incredible news, Maria. All your hard work is paying off." Maria smiled, but her expression quickly turned serious. "It's all of our hard work, Jamal. None of this would be possible without you, without everything you've been through." Jamal shook his head. "I may have sparked something, but this movement is bigger than just me. It's about all of us coming together to create the changes we want to see." As they continued discussing the curriculum rollout, Jamal felt a deep sense of accomplishment. This was what real progress looked like. Not just protests or speeches, but actions that would shape the future of their community. Later that night, as Jamal finally left the office and stepped into the quiet streets, he paused for a moment, reflecting. The city was peaceful, settling into its evening rhythm. He thought about how much had changed in the past 6 months, and how much work still lay ahead. Looking up at the stars, twinkling brightly in the clear night sky, Jamal felt a wave of calm. They were on the right path. He knew the journey wouldn't be easy, and there would be obstacles, but as long as they continued to move forward together, they could build the kind of community they all envisioned. A place where justice wasn't just a word, but a reality for everyone. With renewed resolve, Jamal began walking home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new chances to make a difference, and he was ready to face them, one step at a time.